ProPublica published an article stating that it, quote, has obtained a vast trove of IRS data on the tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people covering more than 15 years, close quote. And the article went on to disclose detailed return information spanning 5 years of several ultra-wealthy Democrats who seem to have much less enthusiasm for taxes in private than they advocate for publicly. But Title 26, Section 7213 makes it a federal felony punishable by fine and up to 5 years in prison willfully to disclose return information. That statement and the balance of the article reflect that the commission of tens of thousands of counts of crimes, probably by some IRS employee or some other authorized disclosure of the data or some hacker. ProPublica reporters and editors also apparently have committed criminal violations under Section 7213A3 by publishing this data. They write that they intended to commit more of that. In fact, they wrote that they thought about the privacy implications and concluded that they're effectively above the law. Has the FBI made any arrests in connection with that matter?
I can't comment on any specific, the existence or conduct of any specific investigation, but to the extent that I can speak in this kind of setting, I'm not aware of any arrests specifically related to the news coverage that you just described.
Has the FBI executed any search warrants or raided any offices or given any tips to CNN about such thing in connection with this matter?
I can't, there's no such activity that I can describe at this time.
The FBI has arrested hundreds of people, as you've described in your testimony, for trespassing, some of them within days of their offense, and put them in solitary confinement, in some cases for 90 days detention without bail. Why is this particular brazen, massive crime deprioritized?
You're talking about specifically the leak of taxpayer information?
Tens of thousands of taxpayers.
Well, I don't think I'm not suggesting any lack of prioritization. There is responsibility for activity of IRS employees that also involves the IRS Inspector General. And so there may be a difference in areas of responsibility as compared if you're comparing it to January 6th, where when it comes to acts of domestic terrorism, that's squarely something that we're expected to prioritize, and I think, as the committee would want, counterterrorism is the FBI's #1 priority.
Director Wray, have there been any arrests in connection with the New York Times publication last September of the details of Donald Trump's tax information?
I'm not aware of any.
Did any criminal charges ever get brought against Lois Lerner?
I don't know the answer to that sitting here right now.
Shifting topics a little, Director Wray, but maybe thematically connected and touched on by Mr. Buck. The FBI has frequently dismissed charges against violent rioters over past months in Portland. You made reference to that matter some. Reportedly, over half of the charges brought have been dismissed. I think the number is about 87, and about half of those are gone. On May 28th, the journalist Andy Ngo released a statement and evidence that he was assaulted and beaten while covering the latest violent riot by Antifa at that time. He wrote about being pursued as he fled through the city streets and having to beg refuge in a hotel and fleeing into the upper floors to evade being captured and killed by rioters calling for his death. Mr. Ngo's been repeatedly targeted, physically attacked because of his reporting on Antifa violence in Portland and Seattle. You mentioned earlier Asian Americans being specifically targeted. That includes Mr. Ngo. Members of this committee have written you specifically before I joined this committee this session about prior assaults on Mr. Ngo. We did it again early this week. There's been no response. In 1961, the Attorney General sent 600 U.S. Marshals to Alabama to protect freedom riders from mobs of violent people who are attacking them. Why is the FBI not living up to its traditions in the enforcement of civil rights and protection of journalists like Mr. Ngo?
So first thing I would say is when you're describing the prosecutions in Portland, to be clear, the FBI is not dismissing any cases. The decisions to prosecute or dismiss prosecutions are made by the prosecutors, not by the FBI. And so any frustration you might have in that regard shouldn't be directed our way. The second, we have prioritized investigations of what I would call anarchist violent extremism, which includes any number of individuals who self-identify, say, with Antifa. And in fact, we've had a significant increase in our number of anarchist violent extremist investigations during my tenure. In fact, we had more anarchist violent extremist arrests last year in 2020 than the prior 3 years combined. So we're actively pursuing those investigations where we can. It's a threat that we take very seriously. We saw, for example, in recent memory, the first lethal anarchist violent extremist attack last year. It was directed by an Antifa identifier who attacked a supporter of the other side, and that defendant ultimately died in a shootout with the marshals, as you may know.
The gentleman's,
it's something we take very seriously.
gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a unanimous consent?
For technical reasons, the committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, yeah.